In this video, I'm going to share with you several principles, concepts, and ideas that you could use to literally 10x your income in 2023. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to walk you through several big ideas. You'll probably want to pull out your journal. You may want to pause me along the way if you have the right mindset and the right setting. So there's the concept of set and setting. You put yourself in the right situation where your input can shape your outlook. That's actually going to be one of the key principles I'm going to show you. But if you put yourself in the right environment and you get yourself into a flow state while you watch this, your mind will change, your vision will change, your insights will change, your identity will change. So I invite you to put yourself into the right set and setting, get yourself into the right mindset. There's actually a concept from Dr. Robert Cialdini. He calls it persuasion. And it's the idea that you want to pre-frame yourself to get the right ideas. And so in this, I can just tell you, I can promise you that if you put yourself in the right situation, in the right mindset, but also the right setting, meaning turn off notifications and things like that, and actually fully absorb this, fully listen, and maybe even pull out your journal, block all things out. And if you give yourself the set and the setting, the set of expectation and openness to new ideas and openness to how your mindset can be transformed, expecting, there's actually a great concept called the expectation effect. It's expecting that your ideas and insights will be big and expecting that you will learn things that will help you to literally 10x your income in the next 12 months in 2023. This could be a phenomenal year, a big year. And I invite you to be approach oriented this year. In psychology, motivation is usually broken up as approach oriented or avoid oriented. And when there are negative projections about the future, actually, as people, we are all operating based on our predictions for and our assumptions of the future. And given that we're going into 2023, there's a lot of negative projections, and prospection is just the idea that as people, we are operating based on our views of the future. So if you have negative predictions, negative expectations towards the future, that's going to lead you into a more retreating mindset. We're going to be avoid oriented. This is the opportunity for you to be very approach oriented, to be on offense, to have commitment, courage, vision, and to operate based on your own assumptions and principles. Yes, context matters. Yes, the environment is real, but also your input shapes your outlook. You want to be strategically ignorant of almost everything going on in the world, because most of the content in the world is designed to provide negative expectation and fear, because that's the stuff that sells, honestly. Creating fear and worry and nervousness. As people, we're just more drawn to that because we're survival beings. We're in survival. And so when someone says that the world's going to explode in the next 6 weeks or something, that is a lot more interesting to people. That grabs attention, rather than teaching you and showing you how you can actually make this year bigger than ever, and that this is actually the biggest opportunity, the best opportunity. And if you have a right mindset and a right strategy and a right approach, right environment, right people, and if you're willing to block out a lot of that noise, this is actually likely one of the biggest opportunities of your life. And that's actually a big part of the research on hope. And again, I'm about to share my screen with you, and I'm going to walk through a set of principles. This is going to rock your world, blow your mind. But there's a lot of research on hope, high hope people versus low hope people. And one of the differences, there are a lot of key differences, but one of the key differences is that low hope people consume material and surround themselves with people that enable them to justify why they shouldn't have hope in the future. Hope, from a psychology standpoint, is like oxygen to the body. Without hope, we wither and perish. Think about how hard life is when you lose hope, when you have no hope for the future. What does that do for your motivation? What does that do to your identity? Even all of the research on motivation and grit shows that hope is essentially the thing that starts you moving and allows and enables grit, but it also the thing that keeps you going. So people with high hope, meaning they're committed to their goals, they're flexible in their approach, they're willing to find and generate new pathways, they're willing to learn from their experiences, and they believe that they have agency and choice in what matters. Psychologists call that having an internal locus of control, or having a sense of agency, is that they have a sense that I can commit, I can find the way, I can find the help, I can adjust, I can iterate, innovate, adapt. High hope people, they block out people and information media that would drain their hope. They also proactively seek information that boosts their expectations, their hopes, and their practical knowledge and information about how to get where they want to go. So with that said, I'm going to jump into my slide. There's just one slide with several principles and ideas that I'm going to go into. So let me go ahead and jump into that. And truly, if you apply even half of these ideas, even by the end of January, you will be in a fundamentally different place. You will be a different person with a different identity, a different approach, different models, and you'll have let go of many aspects of your current self or even your past self that have been leading you to being much more fear-based, and avoidance-based. The first principle is change your inputs. Whatever you let into your brain consistently shapes your view of the world. None of us see the world as it is. We see the world as we are. No one has an objective view of the world. We all have mental models of the world, and we see it subjectively. So you don't see the world as it is. You see the world as you are. The primary way to reshape your mindset, to reshape your view of the world, is to educate yourself in better ways. And if you're wanting to literally and specifically 10x your income, here are just a few books that I think are very good. Obviously, Think and Grow Rich is a classic, The Richest Man in Babylon, and then the book Success is for You by Dr. David Hawkins. I would also suggest many other books, probably several I will go into in the other principles. One of the primary things you want to do is you want to give yourself information regularly that gives you inspiration. Another book actually I would put on there is Go for No. That is a great book. I would also put on there Anti-Fragile. But basically, if you're consuming very high quality material, I would rank order your material, basically on a scale from 0 to 10. I would give most social media a 0 to 1 score, and most media is kind of like consuming sugar, like just constant sugar in your diet. Obviously, that's going to destroy your body. Well, think about what most people's media diet does to their brain, to their identity, to their mindset, to their vision, to their motivation, to their goals. So you want to regularly consume material that is expanding your vision, giving you ideas, giving you energy. And truly, teachings, ideas have energy. They have an impact. They can shape not only your ideas, your insights, your vision. Actually, I would add to this list the magic of thinking big. And this is going to be one of the things that I'm going to talk to you about in the next principle, which is obviously expanding your vision for what you expect, what you want, and what you're accepting of life. But change your inputs. And I would also track the books you read. I'm filming this video on January 7th. I have a spreadsheet. And there's a great concept called Pearson's Law, which I'm going to go into even later, which is that whatever you measure improves. And so I would challenge you to start tracking and measuring the books you read in 2023. You could also measure your peak experiences. You could measure your key big wins. You could measure whatever you want, but I definitely challenge you to measure and have a spreadsheet of all of the books that you read this year. Again, I've already read 4 books this year, and like attracts like. As you're consuming better material, you're going to want better material. It's kind of like when you eat healthy, you want to eat healthier. If you eat junk food, you're going to want more junk food. Every behavior and action seeks more of itself. All behavior in a lot of ways is addictive. And so if you're consuming material that's closer to 9 or 10 on, call it a scale of quality of information, then that's going to become your standard. That's going to become your operating system. And it's going to lead to more and better information. So this leads me to number 2, which is visualize and open yourself up spiritually. One of the great principles of Stephen R. Covey is the idea that mental creation precedes physical creation. It's the idea that when you're building a physical house, you start with a blueprint. The blueprint is kind of the mental creation. It's the plan. You have to have a plan. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And so it's important to realize that mental creation, whatever the ideas are in your head, your imagination, is what then leads. And that also includes your view of the world, what you commit to, what you see, what you expect. And so you want to start getting hyper specific. You want to be very specific about the amount of money you want to make. And you want to be seemingly unrealistic. Have a big number that is so big, it seems impossible. I love the book, The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss, and he talks about how unrealistic goals are actually easier than realistic ones. And there's a lot of reasons for this. One is that there's far more competition for realistic goals. There's far more competition for people fighting and competing from an evolutionary standpoint for basically the average. And so there's a lot less competition for seemingly unrealistic goals. They're also a lot more motivating. Impossible is important. It's very important that you go from impossible, because if you're only going for what you believe is possible, then you're basically just going for your current life. You never actually break the glass ceiling if you're just going for what you think is possible. Anyone who's transformed their own life, anyone who's gotten out of a bad situation, they did something that was seemingly impossible, especially to other people. Most people, they're looking at you, and when they think about who you are and when they think about your future self, they don't expect you to change much. They expect you to basically continue to be who you are now. This is also how most people view their future self. The research on future self shows that when most people project or think about their future self, call it 3, 5, or 10 years into the future, they basically believe that their future self is the same person they are today, which is what Carol Dweck would call a fixed mindset. So it's important for you to be striving for impossible. Nothing is impossible with God. You want to be striving for a vision that most people would think is impossible. And then you want to increase your faith in that vision. And that could include your faith in God. With God, all things are possible. You can pray and ask for help. You can visualize, you can mentalize. But there are a few different approaches to visualization. One is take time in your journal and just in your mind to practice the skill of imagination. Actually, Dr. Daniel Gilbert, he's a Harvard researcher and he spent a lot of time studying future self. He says that most people, they don't see a different future self because they simply lack the imagination. They don't take time to imagine it. And so you want to work on your imagination. You want to build that muscle. You want to take the time in your journal and in your mind to feel and think and see a bigger future self, but get specific. If your goal, for example, is to make $50,000 this year, 10x it and make it 500,000. It does not matter if you don't currently have the pathways, the strategy, or the approach to get there. If you can see it and think about it, then you can start to identify with it and start to come up with pathways to get there. I'm going to go into that in a second. But there are a few other ways to visualize that I want to get into for a second. One is obviously having a big picture view of your future self. You could call it at the end of 2023. You could also visualize your future self 3 years into the future. You want to have a more holistic and vivid view of your future self, call it in a year from now, where you're seeing your future self, say maybe 10x the income that you have now or 10x the net worth. You can imagine that, you can see it, you can write it down, you can affirm it. But you also want to visualize your future self at milestones along the way. You want to actually see your future self in a certain situation having done something. So for example, give yourself shorter timelines on this. Maybe it is that you want to write a book or you want to do something really amazing at your job and then present everything you've done to your boss. That is visualizing a specific instance, a specific milestone. You want to think in terms of a context and in terms of a checkpoint that is somewhere between 1 and 3 months away. With that checkpoint, you want that checkpoint to be massive, which leads you in the short run to doing a crazy sprint and for you to attempt and try things that are seemingly ridiculous. When you have a short-term goal, it's kind of the idea that necessity is the mother of invention. When you give yourself a really short timeline, also this is Parkinson's law, that work fills the space in which you give it. If you give yourself a really short timeline to do something seemingly impossible, seemingly ridiculous, seemingly big, and then you commit to that, you visualize it, you see it, and you then strive for it in the short run, that can lead you to sprinting and trying things in a powerful way that are very different than you've ever done before. You can put yourself into a position where you're open to new ideas, open to new strategies, open to asking for help in different ways, seeking mentorship. There's that idea that when the student is ready, the teacher appears, but also when the student is ready and committed, then you start to see and operate from your future and you start to try things with a more open mind, with less ego. And I'm going to go into this a little bit more in the next principle, but it's just the idea, have a broad and specific. What I mean by that is a bigger, more holistic future self at the end of the year with your goal in mind. But then you want to have short-term specific visualizations of yourself at checkpoints along the way, 1 to 3 months out. And you want to set up a massive and amazing checkpoint that is ridiculous from here to there. And it could be 1 to 3 months. And it's you specifically doing something. As an example, I'm speaking at an event on February 2nd. And so that is a checkpoint. I see myself speaking at that event in, call it 3 weeks from now. And there's a lot of really brilliant, seemingly impossible things that I want to do before that event so that when I'm sitting at that event speaking, I'm going to be positioned very differently. So when you have a short-term specific event that you visualize, then you can really sprint towards that milestone. And then whether you fully achieve it or not doesn't really matter. This is one of the things that most people have wrong about goal setting and about visualization is that they think that if they don't achieve the goal perfectly, then they're a loser. Goals in a lot of ways and visualization is a tool to channel your mindset, your identity, and your energy towards a different type of action than your current self. You want to operate from your future self, and you want to operate from a place of commitment and innovation so that you're trying new things. When the why is strong enough, you will find the how. Also, when the why is strong enough, you'll be willing to try and do things that your former self wouldn't do if you were uncommitted. So the purpose of goals, yes, it's nice to hit them. Yes, it's great to commit to the result and then find the way. And that's a really powerful thing. But whether you hit the goal or not doesn't really matter, because as you make progress along the way, as you transform, your vision's going to expand, your goals are going to expand. Also, when you get specific, when you visualize a specific result, call it you want to 10x your income, as you affirm that and as you think about it and as you write about it, as you speak about it, as you pray about it, your brain will start to search for it. This is what psychologists call selective attention. It's the idea that as people, we see what we're looking for. Whatever you focus on expands. Whatever you focus on, you become. Whatever you're focused on, you see more of. And so as you start to look for a specific result, you're going to start seeing doorways and opportunities all around you that will help you get there. It's like the idea that there are gold coins all around us, but most people are looking for bronze coins. And so all they see is the bronze coins. And so if you put on different glasses, you can see different things. And so your goals and what you affirm, what you're looking for, what you're seeking shapes what you see. It also shapes what you don't see. You stop seeing all the things in the world that are ultimately a distraction to that. Because again, we all see the world not as it is, but as we are. We also see the world as we're seeking what we want, we search for, and we're looking for it. And so you are, in a lot of ways, what you're seeking as a person. The final form of visualization I would give you and spiritual creation would be evening and morning routines. And I'm going to go into this even more depthly in a second, but the evening and morning are the best times to visualize. And also you want to visualize with emotion, with gratitude, with joy. But in the evening, when you're getting ready to go to bed, there's that great quote from Thomas Edison. He said, never go to bed without a request to your subconscious. And so as you're going to bed, one of the things you want to visualize is what you're going to be doing and who you're going to be the next day. You want to visualize yourself focused on the important, not the urgent. You want to see yourself in a proactive, conscious, intentional state, doing what you want to do. This is why you not only visualize the outcome, you also visualize the process. And the process is you actually going through the work. If that's you asking your boss for a raise, visualize yourself the next day, walking up and having that conversation. If you're writing a book, visualize yourself the next day, getting yourself into a flow state and actually writing the book and producing the number of words or pages that you want. If you're wanting to visualize yourself going to the gym and having a phenomenal workout, visualize yourself actually doing the act. And so one really powerful part of visualization is in the evening, visualizing and committing to who you're going to be and what you're going to be doing and seeing yourself doing it and just seeing the day play out, seeing yourself operating with courage as your future self. Then you go to bed and your unconscious will work on that. And then you can wake up and you can immediately, from a proactive and from an approach orientation state, start being and operating focused on the important, not the urgent, starting to be your future self and moving forward. The next principle is affirm your future self, affirm the amount of money you're specifically going to make and emotionally accept it. There's a great quote from Neville Goddard. He said, assume the feeling of your wish fulfilled. Another quote from Dr. David Hawkins is the idea that the unconscious will only allow you to have what you believe you deserve. There's a great book on this subject called Raise Your HDL, or Your Healthy Deserve Level, from Gary Cady. And the idea is simple. It's the idea that 95% of what we're doing is unconscious, and your unconscious is going to produce most of your results. And so what you want to do is you want to raise your unconscious, and the most powerful way to do that is to think about what you want and to affirm it and accept it emotionally. Most people do not get what they want, first off, because they don't actually take the time to specifically visualize it, see it, commit to it, speak it, and clarify and plan it, similar to a blueprint. They don't actually make a specific blueprint, see it, and then learn how to actually build the model that they're wanting. But also emotionally, they reject what they want. They don't actually believe they deserve it. And so they do everything they can to avoid it or to subconsciously sabotage it. There's another great book on this subject called The Big Leap by Dr. Gay Hendricks. And he talks about a principle he calls the upper limit problem. And the upper limit problem is the idea that we all have a subconscious baseline for what we believe we deserve and what we believe we have. This is true in terms of money, in terms of success, in terms of relationships. And anytime you start visualizing, committing, and clarifying a vision, and you start operating towards that goal, and you start bringing in more success than you've ever had, or more happiness, or more results, you'll hit that upper limit problem where you don't feel comfortable with the positive changes you're making in your life. And so you will unhealthily and subconsciously self-sabotage yourself to bring it back. This could be true, for example, if a person makes a lot of money and they have more money than they're used to, they will subconsciously find some way to flush it down the toilet because it's above their emotional baseline. And so it's important that you raise your emotional baseline to be at the level of your goals. And you do that by, first off, visualizing in specifics what you want. Then you, in the evening and morning, visualize it, commit to it, affirm it, state it, speak it. Also speak it to powerful people. You want to have, obviously, key people in your life that are really goal-oriented people. I love the quote from Dan Sullivan, who said, surround yourself with people who remind you more of your future than your past. Obviously, there's the quote from Zig Ziglar. He said that you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. There's also the mastermind principle that as people, whenever you're talking to someone, the whole becomes different from the sum of the parts. So as 2 people come together, they form what Napoleon Hill would call a third mind. The third mind is basically the whole that is different from the sum of both parts. When you're talking with someone, you build a third brain, and the third brain is essentially the relationship between you. In psychology, there's a concept called relationality, and it's the idea that the relationship between 2 people is actually the reality. It's why my relationship with my wife is different than call it her friend and her relationship together. It's the relationship between two things that's actually the reality. And so whenever two people are speaking and talking and collaborating and brainstorming, they then form that third mind. And that third mind is what Napoleon Hill would call the mastermind, which is what opens up doors. And so this is a very powerful way to upgrade your subconscious, is ultimately to have powerful conversations with increasingly supportive people of your future self, but also people who are living and being and acting in ways that inspire you, and that they can give you great feedback. They can call you out. You can also be really open with them. This is why having an accountability partner is really powerful. But the more and more you speak of your future self, and this is actually something even that Mr. Beast did. Mr. Beast is obviously a famous YouTuber, but Mr. Beast was very vocal and honest and explicit about his future self. He talked about, and he even filmed videos back in 2015 when he was a 17-year-old kid. And he only had like 8,000 YouTube subscribers, but he talked about, and he even talked to his future self in those videos. And he was talking about how 5 years from now, so that would be, from 2015 to 2020, he said he was going to have over 1 million subscribers. Well, what happens when you start publicly and vocally affirming your future self is that you want to act in consistency with your words. It's actually a concept called the consistency principle in psychology, that we want our identity, our words, and our actions to be aligned. And so if you start speaking and talking about your future self and what you want to do, then you feel a need to be consistent with your words. You can see a true point of no return transition and an inflection point with Mr. Beast when he started filming those videos in October of 2015. All of a sudden, shortly after that, his videos started getting more successful. He first off expected it, he saw it, but also he felt a compulsion to be consistent with his words, and he felt even a form of necessity, which led to innovation. And so necessity is the mother of invention. And you can just see that he was operating from a different future self. He expected things differently. He wanted things differently. He became willing to change his strategy and operate from his future rather than operating from his past. So you want to affirm and emotionally accept and reach a place of acceptance. And this can be done in a number of ways as well. When you're visualizing your future self, when you're committing to a certain amount of money, you just want to get to a place where you feel good about it. And so you do want to spend time alone, not only writing your journal, but also walking and just feeling good about your vision. You want to feel good about it. Assume the feeling of your wish fulfilled. The next step, and all of this kind of comes together, is obviously shifting your identity and commitment. Your identity from a psychological standpoint is primarily two things. Number one, it's the narrative you have for yourself. This includes your past self, your current self, and your future self. Whatever story you most believe about yourself is your identity. And your identity drives your actions and behaviors. And your behavior and your identity are a feedback loop. As you start acting and doing things that your future self would do, as James Clear would say, you're casting votes for the type of person you want to be. But also, as you're committing and as you're getting clear on your future self and you're getting to a place of commitment, that will reshape your action so that you're acting very differently than your past self. You're acting from your future rather than acting from your past. Another aspect of identity is the standards with which you're firmly committed. By standard, we all have standards. Your standards are what you most want, what you most seek, and also it's what you hold yourself to. Your standards represent what you say yes and no to. So if you say yes to something, that means it's within your standards. But if you raise your standards to the level of your future self, and then you start saying no to things below that standard, then that recommits and that reconfirms your identity. An example of this could be a public speaker. If a public speaker maybe is at the level where they can charge fees of $5,000 to speak at an event, and then they raise their floor or they raise their standard. And by the way, your standard and your floor is the same thing. And if something is truly a standard, that means it's what you're committed to. You're very committed to your standards. And if you continually live outside of those standards or you live below them, then it's not a true standard. It's not a true commitment. But back to the speaker, if they took their fee from $10,000 and upped it to $15,000, and then they started pitching themselves. This goes to the concept of going for no, where they started pitching themselves to events at the new fee of $15,000, and people say, no, that's outside our budget, but we can pay you $5,000. Well, if it's truly a standard, they'll start saying no to things below the standard. They'll say, no, the standard is this. This actually taps into a concept that Dan Sullivan calls always be the buyer. It's a beautiful concept. And basically what Dan explains is that in every situation, you're either being the buyer or the seller. The buyer is someone who knows exactly what they want. They're clear on their standards, and they're also very comfortable walking away from a situation if they can't get what they want. So, for example, if you're someone who wants to buy a car, you know exactly the type of car you want, and you know all the details, you know the interior design, etc. You know exactly what you want, and you're committed to that, and that is your standard. then you're willing to walk away from cars that are not at the standard. You're very specific about what you want. You're willing to walk away. This is the core difference, according to Dan Sullivan, between the buyer and the seller is the buyer is the one that can walk away. And this is true in relationships as well. Think about, two people who are dating each other. The buyer knows what they want, whereas the seller is someone who isn't clear on their standards. They're also desperate to be in the relationship, and they'll continually lower the deal or lower what they're willing to do in order to be in the relationship because they're desperate to be there. If a person is willing to essentially do almost anything and everything to be in the relationship, then you know that they're the seller. Whereas the buyer is clear on what they want, they state it explicitly, and they're willing to walk away if the relationship doesn't give it. And they're happy to walk away, and they're not desperate. That's the key. And so when you set new standards for yourself, you want to be the buyer where you're really clear on what you want, and you're very explicit about what you want. And you'll find that as you make that your new standard, and as you're willing and comfortable walking away from situations that don't provide you that, for example, the speaker who sets their new standard at 15,000 and some event says, no, we'll pay you 5,000. And the speaker says, no, I'm okay. You can just go find another speaker. When you're willing to walk away, you become insanely attractive to other people. It's amazing what people will often come back to you and say, okay, we'll give you what you want because you're being the buyer. You're being clear and you're also willing to walk away. And being able to walk away and let go of situations and things like that actually attracts to you exactly what you want. But they also repel what you don't want. The key here is that you want to set higher standards for yourself, and then you want to commit to those standards, and you want to be the buyer, meaning you're willing to walk away when situations don't provide you that. That is how you're going to start to make your new standard into your new identity. It's also how you're going to make your standard into your new norm, where saying no to things that you used to say yes to is very powerful for your identity. It's showing that you're committed to a higher game. But also once you eventually get that yes, once that speaker actually gets their first yes at the 15,000 mark, that then is a massive evidence to them that becomes their new norm. Once they get the first yes, then all of a sudden they're going to play at that level. They're going to see themselves at that level. And all of a sudden they're going to start getting more and more yeses. There's a great quote on this concept, and it's from the book As a Man Thinketh by James Allen. And he says that people do not attract what they want, but what they are. This is why you want to shift your identity and get committed to a new standard. And once you make that your standard, and once you accept that, affirm that, and start operating as that, then you start to be in the world at a different level, at a different frequency, I guess you could say. And you start to act in ways and be in ways that attracts the opportunities that you want. And pulling all of these concepts together and kind of making it simple. What you want to do right now, if you're watching this in early 2023, is obviously set a much bigger expectation, a much bigger vision. And it doesn't matter how seemingly unrealistic it is. You don't need to go out to social media and tell a lot of people about this. You want to have a mastermind of a few people around you that you can talk to about this, about much bigger visions and goals. But as you begin to visualize a really big January, for example, or a really big 90 days, and you have a milestone and you're sprinting towards that and you're operating as your future self, but also you're giving yourself space and time to think, to visualize, to journal, to reflect, then your unconscious will give you ideas. Though, and even God, if you're praying and if you're open to prayer, you'll receive inspiration or ideas, but also your subconscious will provide you ideas. You'll start to see and get ideas, concepts that will be really interesting, that are the exact pathways to your goals. Let me give myself as a simple example. I'm highly committed in 2023 to achieve 10 times more than I have in 2022. There's various metrics, for example, my income, but also the amount of books that I've sold. I'm an author who's written, multiple best-selling books that have sold hundreds of thousands of copies, but also even this channel on YouTube. Like, there are very specific things that I'm going to 10x in 2023. And as I'm visualizing that, as I'm committing to that, as I'm operating even in the beginning part of January as my future self with very different energy, very different insight, very different commitment, it's amazing what ideas I get. I start to generate pathways. Again, that's a big aspect of high hope and high commitment is that when the why is strong enough, you will find the how. You'll also start to find the who's, the type of people that can help you get to your vision, and also that you can help, that you can create collaborations, relationships, and opportunities that are transformational relationships. And so even recently, because it's early January, and because I've been committing to visualizing, journaling, and also operating more as my future self, even just recently, I got a few really big ideas about how I would go about achieving my 10x vision. And that led me to thinking about certain people I could partner with that I would have not thought about maybe a month ago when I was less committed, and then being proactive and using the principle and idea of going for no. I was proactive and made some pitches, made some conversations, initiate some conversations. This is the first principle of highly effective people, is be proactive. Obviously, the second one is begin with the end in mind. So you begin with the end in mind, and you become very proactive rather than reactive, but also rather than passive. You're very proactive, and you're actually putting things out there. Very few people are highly proactive. Most people are waiting for life to come to them. They're passive. They're not active. They're fear-based, not approach-based. But once you get committed, you become highly courageous. Actually, this is the point of no return. And there's this great concept actually that commitment is a statement of what is. You can know what you're committed to by the results you're now getting. This goes back to identity and standards, that once you shift your identity, once you shift your standards, and once you get fully committed, then you start to change what's in your life, because what's in your life right now is what you're most committed to. Everything in your life right now, you're still committed to. There's actually another great book on this subject called Already Free, written by a family therapist, and he blends the ideas of Buddhism with Western philosophy and Western psychotherapy. But basically the main idea here is that the core concept of life and the core depth and principle of humanity is that we are all already free right now. We all come up with narratives and stories and excuses that make us the victim, whether it's our spouse, our kids, our past. We always make up stories that make us feel like we're not free. And we have all of these ideas in our mind that once this happens, then I will be free to be who I want. This actually fits with the concept of be, do, have. Most people operate where they think they have to first have something, whether it's a new job or a new position or a certain amount of money or a certain credential. They think they have to have something first in order to do what they want so that they can finally be free to be who they want to be. The opposite is true. And this fits with the book Already Free, that you have to first be who you want to be. You're already free to be who you want to be. You are already free right now, and you're freely choosing. This fits with identity as well, that you're freely choosing the stories that you have, for example, about yourself, about your life, about why you are where you're at, but you're also freely choosing the relationships and commitments you're in. As an example, you're freely choosing to watch this video right now. You are already free, and with your freedom, you're watching or listening to this video. But that's true of everything else you've done today. You freely went to work if you have a job. You freely did everything you did. You are already free right now. This is why commitment is a statement of what is, that whatever you're committed to, you're freely choosing right now. And you can freely choose something else. Once you commit to something else, once you commit to a new standard, a new goal, a new objective, then you will freely choose that. And you'll also freely no longer choose what you would previously choose. And once you get to a place of point of no return commitment, the point of no return is the point at which your identity shifts and you reach a place of full commitment. Once you reach a place of full commitment, that's when courage occurs. Courage is actually a moment when you're willing to try, fail, and seek what you want. You're willing to take risks emotionally, socially, in another way, where you're courageously committing. This is when you shift from an avoid orientation to an approach orientation. This is also when you shift from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. And a big aspect of a growth mindset is that you seek failure. This is the idea of going for no. You're willing to seek failure and learn and adjust. And you know that you can take every experience, every form of failure and learning, and become much better, much faster. Actually, I love the quote from Seth Godin on this subject. Seth Godin said, "If I fail more than you, I will win." Because the person who's willing to fail, adjust, learn, iterate is going to learn a lot faster than the person with the fixed mindset who has a fragile identity, who's afraid to fail. This also fits back with the concept of anti-fragile. People with a fixed mindset have a fragile identity where they're afraid to fail. They're avoiding failure at all costs. And they think that when they fail, any form of failure truly and fully reflects upon them because they don't believe they can change. They don't believe that their future self will be different. And they think that when they fail, that defines them. And so they avoid failure at all costs. Therefore, they have a fragile mindset, and any form of failure actually shatters them. This is the difference between fragile and anti-fragile is that when volatility or trauma or shocks or challenge or difficulty happens, someone that's fragile or something that's fragile breaks and it gets worse and it becomes essentially destroyed. And that's actually what happens with trauma. We all go through trauma in life, but if you're fragile, then the trauma will break you. If you're anti-fragile, which is the opposite of being fragile, anything that's anti-fragile actually gets better with volatility, challenge, or struggle. And so when you have a growth mindset, you become anti-fragile because you know that you can transform any experience into a gain rather than being in the gap. Actually, me and Dan Sullivan wrote a book on this subject called The Gap and the Gain. And when you have a gain mindset, that you gain from every experience. Everything happens for you, not to you. You're always better because of every experience. You're not bitter because you're the one who defines the meaning of your experience. You're also the one who learns from your experience. This actually fits with research from Dr. David Hawkins, where he explains that as people, very few people raise themselves in consciousness and emotional development because even though we all have literally thousands and tens of thousands of experiences and thoughts every day, most people are on autopilot. They're operating purely from their subconscious rather than growing in their consciousness. And so through a person's life, we all have millions and millions of experiences, but we avoid learning. We avoid wisdom because it's painful. All progress starts by telling the truth, which takes courage. It takes courage to tell the truth. It takes courage to admit that you went through some hard things. And it also takes courage to approach your past, your biggest traumas, and to own that experience rather than letting that experience own you, to reframe the meaning and to choose to experience post-traumatic growth where you become grateful for what happens and you believe you got better because of what happened. That's the difference between post-traumatic growth and trauma, is that someone who's fragile, when they go through a trauma, they believe they're worse because of what happened, and they believe they're the victim of what happened, and they believe that their experience determined them. Where someone who experiences post-traumatic growth and they become anti-fragile believe that they happen to their experiences don't happen to them. So no matter what happens to you, you define the meaning and you can get better, and you are better, and you're wiser, and you've got a bigger, more expansive purpose and ability and agency because of what happened. Even if something physically difficult or emotionally difficult, you lose a loved one, right? Or you even lose a limb because of what happened. And this is a key aspect of post-traumatic growth. You're now better, you're more grateful, and you have a higher sense of purpose, meaning, and mission because of what happened. You now can be, do, and have more because of what happened, because of the wisdom and experience you have. And this goes straight to Viktor Frankl, who wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning. And Viktor Frankl talked about how essential it is to have a purpose to fulfill. He said that what people need is not a tensionless state, but rather the striving and struggling for a worthwhile goal, a freely chosen task. If you don't have a purpose, you'll perish. And that's exactly what happened during the Holocaust, which is what Viktor Frankl wrote about, is he saw that when people don't have hope and a specific purpose to fulfill in their future, then in the present, they become really shallow. They become retrospective, or they're thinking about the past, and they literally decay physically and spiritually. The only way to have spiritual, mental, and emotional strength is to have a specific goal that you want to achieve, that you commit to, have faith in, and are willing to stretch and strive for. And so without that goal, without that purpose, without that meaning, then you begin to decay in the present. So anything and everything can happen for you, not to you. Now, this takes us to the next principle, and I'm weaving all of this stuff together, and I'm going to ultimately pull all this together at this point. When you're operating from your future and as your future self, when you're operating from the future, this is the whole idea of reverse engineering. But once you see, visualize, and connect with your bigger picture future self, and you start operating from the future rather than operating from the present, the future will take you in a nonlinear pathway. It's not some linear path from where you are to where you want to go. Actually, if you're operating from the future and you reverse engineer it, it's a very different path and very different action than what you're doing. This comes to pathways thinking. When the why is strong enough, you will find the how. You'll also find the who's. And so pathways thinking is the idea that people with high hope, high commitment, high why, meaning they have a clear why on what they're doing. They have a visual future self with a milestone that they're sprinting towards and innovating towards and being courageous towards and willing to find new and different pathways. It's the opposite of insanity, which is trying the same thing over and over and over again and not learning and essentially not adapting, not changing. Whereas pathways thinking means that you take every experience, especially the experiences of not achieving your goal. If you're not achieving your goal, you take that experience, you learn from it, you use it to adapt, iterate, and transform your path, your strategy. You're always adjusting, always improving your path, and you're always finding and creating. And when you are in a full-on commitment mode, you will find the way. When the why is strong enough, you will find the how. You'll also find the who's. Also, once you've crossed that point of no return where you've fully committed to the results you want, you also are expecting everything, but you're attached to nothing. This is a key aspect of being in a growth mindset, is that you're not attached to the outcome. You're committed, but you're not attached. It's not unhealthy. You don't think you need it. You just want it, and you can operate from want. And then you have an extreme approach orientation. You're no longer afraid of failure. Every result along the way, you're flexible with. You're not attached to any result along the way. You're going to learn from every result along the way. And this is what makes you anti-fragile. Another aspect of being anti-fragile is that time is on your side. You know that you have time on your side, and you know that you can learn from every experience. And if you do learn from every experience, you're going to constantly be learning. You'll learn more every day than the average person learns in a week, month, or year, because most people are not approaching their future self. They're not being courageous towards their future self, and they're not facing big failure and then having to iterate, adapt, adjust, and continuously learning. But when you have an extreme approach mindset where you're willing to go for no, where you're willing to fail, where you're willing to learn, where you're being proactive, you're no longer afraid of failure. And this puts you in a mindset where you're in full learning mode, full transformation mode. This is the essence of a growth mindset, is that you're comfortable with failure. You're actually seeking and you're happy with failure because you know you can turn failures into big learning. This is also something that creates a lot of flow. One of the, I guess you could say, antecedents or conditions of flow is, first off, you have to have clear goals. But second off, you have to be in a position where you're getting feedback and there's risk. Feedback would be that you're trying something and you're getting feedback. Often it's negative feedback, or it's feedback showing you that your current actions aren't generating your results. When you're getting feedback, and sometimes that feedback can hurt in the moment because it's showing you that you need to change, adjust, that you're not doing things the way that your future self, that you're not doing things in the manner that's going to produce your results. When you're actually trying things and being bold and being courageous, you're going to have so much flow. Think about it. When you try something outside your comfort zone, you ask someone on a date or you ask for a raise, immediately after the fact, think about the amount of learning that you have. Even if it didn't go right, the fact that you were just bold, courageous, and you tried something and then you just got feedback, that after effect is where so much learning and processing happens. And that's where you're in deep, deep, deep flow. Another key aspect of this is when you're operating from and as your future self, you start to get nonlinear insights. This is just the idea that you start to get insights and ideas from the subconscious, from God, from other people, where you start to get insights and ideas that are totally different from your current situation, your current strategy. Maybe you get an idea that you want to reach out to that person, or maybe you want to join that community, or maybe you want to read that book. You start to get nonlinear insights and ideas that come from your future self rather than from your past self. Also, when you're operating as your future self and as you're operating from the future and you have an approach mindset where you're moving towards what's important and you're getting small wins along the way, this taps into this idea of the expectation effect. And by the way, there's a great book called The Expectation Effect, and it fits a lot with the placebo effect. And it just is to the idea, and there's been a lot of research on this, that whatever you expect to happen in a lot of ways is what happens. You in a large part get what you expect. This is true of other people as well, because we see things the way we want to see them. And so once you start operating as your future self, operating from the future, and you're being a lot more proactive, you're less afraid of failure, and you're starting to see progress and see evidences along the way, you start to expect miracles to happen. You start to expect success. You start to expect great things to happen. You start to expect the impossible to happen. You start to expect doors to open. You start to expect and believe that great things will happen, and that you're no longer operating in normal manners. You're no longer operating in a normal world, because none of us are truly operating in the same sphere. We're all operating in our own sphere. And so as you start to see, expect, and believe in miracles and commit to that, you'll start to see them everywhere. And you'll start to see that amazing things can happen. You just start to believe it and see it, and you start to attract it. Another key aspect in all of this is regularly giving yourself space for inspiration, for subconscious insight, for just being and connecting with your future self. The more you're connected to your future self, the more you're connected to your vision, the more you're affirming it, committing to it, and thinking about it and strategizing it, the more you're just going to get ideas. And so the key places to do this are obviously in your evening and your morning routine. Your evening routine could be just honestly being in your journal, reflecting on your day, reflecting on tomorrow, reflecting on your goals, thinking about it, maybe talking about it with a loved one, or just visualizing it and pondering, giving yourself space to ponder, but also going to bed and waking up. There's just your morning brain is so good. And rather than always consuming information, you want to let the information out. You want to give yourself space, the setting to let ideas and insights out on paper. And if you do, you'll be, and especially if you're affirming your future self, if you're getting clear on it, and if you're making progress on a daily basis towards your future self, you're gonna get used to a flood of inspiration, a flood of ideas. If most people, they're just not giving themselves that space. Just today, as an example, I mean, I have I write in my journal every day, and I have for well over a decade, but it is a regular occurrence for me because I pray for inspiration. I put myself in the setting, and I give myself the space to think, to reflect, to strategize on my future self. I'm used to having those subconscious breakthroughs. I'm used to having, ideas from God and from my subconscious coming to me, and then I see it and I feel excited. I feel like, yes, absolutely, these are great big ideas. And then I jump to it. I immediately act on them. I execute on the ideas that come to me, and I'm willing to fail. It's okay if it doesn't work out. I'm going to adjust. I'm going to iterate. I'm going to move forward. Journaling is a beautiful place. They call this spiritual windshield wipers. Just giving yourself the space to just write about what's going on in your life, write about your goals, write about the things you're frustrated about, write about the things you want, write about just the act of writing and thought dumping ultimately clears the clutter, and it kind of frees you from the noise. And then you can sit and write and you can work. Another one is obviously just walking. If you study the lives of very successful people and people who do very innovative things, they're out in nature and they're out just walking, thinking. Walking is obviously really good with your body, but also spatially. 16% of creative ideas happen when you're tightly focused. The other ideas are going to happen obviously when you're in the shower, when you're walking, because just the environment around you, giving yourself the space to freely think, and just being out walking and moving your body somatically, it opens you up to so many ideas. Whenever I go for a walk, whenever I'm walking, whether I'm listening to just peaceful music or even a book, or even just nothing for a time, and I'm walking, I'm talking to myself, I'm thinking, I'm visualizing, I'm speaking to God, I'm shocked. I'm every time I do it, I start getting ideas, I start getting commitment, I start getting excitement. Obviously, the other aspect of giving yourself space is just masterminding. And masterminding is that third mind. And it's about you are the byproduct of the 5 people you speak with the most, that you spend the most time with. And so this is about raising the floor, which is the floor is your bottom. We all have a floor in terms of our average behavior, the people around us. You have a floor in your network. And this would be someone who pulls you to your past and who's holding you back, right? But we all have a floor. And so when you raise your floor, this could be on your average behavior. It could be on your average income, your average thought process, the quality of the information. When you raise your floor, you have higher integrity. Raising your floor actually transforms your future self a lot more, because success is largely a lagging indicator. And so when you raise your floor, that shows you that in the future, you're going to get much bigger results. And you want to always be raising the floor in terms of the people you're surrounding yourself with, the people you're strategizing with, the people you're talking to, the people we're always in communion with other people. And again, it's better to surround yourself with people who remind you of your future than your past, people that you can strategize with, talk with, and be accountable to with your future self, people that will help you plan, strategize your future self. This is about creating an environment and a system around you, people that you're accountable with. So this would be your team, for example, your accountant. You could have assistants, but you could also have collaborators, partners, and also just people that you are inspired by, are accountable with, and people that you're always brainstorming with. And so you want to continuously be giving yourself space to have beautiful, inspiring, powerful conversations where sometimes you can be open and honest that you're struggling, seeking help. One of the most powerful things, obviously, that most people avoid doing is saying, I need help, I want help. When you have a clear goal, there's always ways to get there. The challenge is obviously that just most people, they're unwilling to ask for help and seek help and find the people who have already been there and start to get tangible, applicable advice. Here is the final one. This is the final one, is to regularly reflect and see progress. This goes back to the book that me and Dan wrote, which is The Gap and the Gain. And it is so powerful. And this is something I learned from Dan, but there's so much to this, that when you see what you're looking for. And so at the end of each day, you want to take the time to reflect and see your progress, see the evidences of you actually having been your future self, actually see where you've raised your floor, actually see where miracles were happening, or where God's hand was in your life, or where you learned something that your past self didn't know. Every day you're further along than your past self. And so one big key to building confidence in this, and there's a lot of research and even meta-analyses on confidence, and it shows that confidence is actually the byproduct of past performance and past results, past successes. When you actually make progress and you acknowledge and you see that, it boosts your confidence, which also boosts your imagination towards what you can do. And so every night, reflect on your wins, reflect on your progress, look for evidences that you're being your future self, but also look for evidence that your life is changing and beginning to match your mental and spiritual creation on a weekly basis. Look back on the week. And part of being in the gain is obviously reflecting on and measuring your progress, seeing where you made progress and had experiences that have moved you towards your future self. But another part of being in the gain is turning every experience into a gain, even your biggest failures, or even just your mistakes, or you just going through the motions. You want to be critically self-honest. By critical, I don't mean you're actually critical. I'm just meaning you're actually honest in your self-evaluation. You look back on the week and you say, what actually tangibly happened? And you can do it without emotion. You can just write down on paper, here's what happened, and then be honest about that. Be honest about your self-evaluation. You can also do this on a yearly basis. Actually write down what are all the core things that I've done in the past 5 years in terms of progress towards my goals. I actually recently did this, where I reflected on myself as an author. My first book, this one right here, actually, Willpower Doesn't Work, came out almost 5 years ago. It came out in March of 2018. And so one of the things that I reflected on is, where was I in actually January, because right now it's January 2023. Where was I in January of 2018? And what are all of the things that have happened since then? And I just wrote it down. I wrote down all the forms of progress towards my goals, the books I've published, finished my PhD, went from 0 to 6 kids, moved to Florida, etc. I just wrote down without being emotional about it. I just wrote it down. And then I thought to myself, if I was fully committed and if I was operating as my future self, also, I'm not the same person I was 5 years ago. I've learned a lot. I've changed a lot. I've had some big failures, some big wins. I've got a different network, a different environment. I've got a different floor. I've got a different subconscious. I'm in a much different place in all respects than my former self. And so based on where I'm at right now, and if I was fully committed in 2023, is it possible that I could achieve at least as much, if not more, in terms of quality, maybe not quantity? Maybe I won't do as much. Maybe I'll do far less in 2023 than I have the last 5 years. Maybe I'll publish way less. For example, I'm probably not going to publish 6 books, but is it possible that I could publish 1 book that's worth way more than all 6 of those? And is it possible that even that 1 book, and if I was committed and if I was finding new strategies, could I sell more books in this 1 year alone than I did in the last 5? I know I can, and I'm fully committed to that. As an example, since this book, Willpower Doesn't Work, came out, I've published 5 books. I'm going to publish 2 more in 2023. But my books since 2018 have sold between 500 and 600 to 1 million copies. Like I'm somewhere ballpark 600,000. And so my question is, can I write 1 or 2 books that are qualitatively better and more valuable and more important than all 6 of those? But also, can I at least sell 600,000 copies in this 1 year alone? And the answer is yes, absolutely. And if I commit to that, I can start to find and create strategies. This goes back to the idea that when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And one thing you have to be really honest about when you're reflecting on your past self and when you're reflecting on how you got to where you are is just being open and honest. If you were ready in the past for what you truly wanted, you would have created it by now. Because once you are ready, you become open to feedback. You also become a lot more open and honest. All progress starts by telling the truth. You become honest about why you haven't made the progress you wanted. And so once you become ready, and getting ready is the process of accepting your future self and committing and being honest with yourself and being honest about the evaluation of your past, not in a negative way, but just saying, this is the truth. This is why I got to where I'm at. And then getting committed. And all of these steps here I've talked about are the process of deciding what you want and ultimately getting committed to it. And then through the process, upgrading your identity and making it your new normal. It is very powerful to see the evidences of your future self, to acknowledge those, and then to build upon those. When you train yourself to see your progress and to see those evidences, you'll start to see more and you'll start to create more. One final thing is just that this concept of Pearson's law, which is the idea that whatever you measure improves. Just the act of measuring something, for example, measuring your diet, measuring your income. By measuring something, it will improve, but by measuring it and reporting it back, for example, to your mastermind, to the people you're accountable to, your progress will accelerate dramatically. And so by measuring your progress regularly, by reporting your progress regularly, and by measuring the things that you want to improve. This is an idea of fitness function. And this is the final thought. Then I'm just gonna make you a challenge. But fitness function is the idea that you are whatever you're optimizing yourself for, whatever you're seeking in specifics and measuring and wanting, that's what you're ultimately going to become. And so by measuring your progress regularly, by seeing it, you're going to actually be able to progress a lot faster. Those are just some key principles. I'm going to boil it down really simply and really powerfully right here. And then I'm going to make you a bold invitation. Number 1, whatever you want of 2023, make it 10 times bigger, whether you achieve it or not, and then start to train yourself to ask more of life. I'm actually going to reshare my screen and I'm going to share with you a poem as I wrap this up, and then I'm going to boil all this down and make you a bold commitment. So the poem comes from Jessie Rittenhouse. She said, "I bargained with life for a penny and life would pay no more. However, I begged at evening when I counted my scanty store. Life is a just employer. He gives you what you ask. But once you have set the wages, why you must bear the task. I worked for a menial's hire only to learn dismayed that any wage I had asked of life, life would have willingly paid." So the reason I invite you to think about whatever you're asking of life in 2023, whatever you commit to, whatever you ask of life, it's going to ask of something back. It's the idea that you always have to pay the price. Whatever you want, there's a price to be paid. And if you are willing to pay that price, you can get what you want. And the price is often emotional. It's often the letting go of things you don't want. It's the acceptance of things that you want. And then it's the willingness to shift your identity and commit, and then to proactively do what's required. Once you actually go through the identity shift, the point of no return, you get committed and you stop avoiding failure and you stop worrying about failure and you reach a place of anti-fragility where you can turn anything to your gain. Once you're operating in that mode and you're expecting miracles, expecting success, then essentially you become unstoppable. By the end of 2023, you're going to get what you asked of 2023. And so why not just 10x it, expect more, expand the vision, and then do whatever the vision requires. Do whatever 2023 requires of you. Everyone's going to go through 2023. Most of the masses are going to mostly be their current self and mostly be on autopilot, mostly be distracted by all the media. They're going to be consuming low-level media. They're going to be mostly distracted. They're not going to be in flow very much, meaning they're not going to go deep. They're not going to be giving themselves space. They're not going to be improving their inputs, giving themselves space, journaling, committing. So this is a beautiful opportunity for you. It's also beautiful because you can train yourself to create the results you want, irrespective of the volatility in, I guess you'd call it, the environment, the market, etc. We know that there's a lot of naysayers, a lot of doomsdayers, a lot of pessimism and doubt for 2023. But you can train yourself, if you're massively approach-oriented, to turn all of this to your gain. And you can start to be very specific about what you want. And you can start to create situations and experiences, conversations very quickly. Even just recently, I was just talking to a friend. And he said that he was getting into a place of flow and to a kind of that limitless mindset where nothing becomes impossible. And there was something he wanted. He actually wanted to buy the lot of land right next to his house. And he started having conversations, and he started to, rather than avoiding failure, rather than having ego, when you no longer have ego, you're willing to ask for help. You're willing to seek help. You're willing to find new resources. You're willing to have awkward conversations because it's no longer awkward. You're no longer worried about what people think. You no longer have ego. And anyways, it just showed in a single day, he was able to actually to not only get the lot, which seemed impossible, but he was able to actually get external funding for it from a friend. So he didn't even have to come up with it. And so in a single day, he was able to get what he wanted at the price he wanted and with someone else's help in a single day. And this becomes really powerful. When you start to learn these principles of mental creation precedes physical creation, you can have really big picture visions and goals that you commit to, a higher level purpose, but also on a daily basis, you can start to visualize something and then watch it generate very quickly. So I hope that helps. I challenge you to commit to 10xing your income in 2023, and then affirming that, committing to it, having short milestones along the way, and sprinting to those milestones, being very approach oriented, shifting your identity, shifting the floor of those you're around, having conversations, giving yourself the space in your evening, morning routine, your journaling, your walking, upgrading your input, and eliminating anything that is pulling down at your faith or that is low frequency, raising your floor on the information that comes in, the actions you take, the boldness that you have. I hope that helps. My name is Dr. Benjamin Hardy. Please like this video, please share it, and please go out and 10x yourself in 2023. Have an amazing day.